Now you can hear me, I think, yes. So, hello everyone. My name is Elin and I'm from Sweden, from the Swedish Arts Council. In Sweden, it's the Swedish Arts Council and the Swedish Film Institute that is hosting the Swedish Creative Europe desk. I'm very glad to be here, and I want to thank you, Eglė, for this opportunity to come here. So, I guess many of you already know quite a lot about Sweden, but I thought maybe there are some that need some very brief basic facts. So we are just on the other side of the Baltic Sea, 1 hour flight from Vilnius, so it's very, very close between Stockholm and Vilnius. We have approximately 10 million inhabitants. As you might know, Stockholm is the capital. And we also have Malmö in the south and Göteborg on the west side, that are the 3 main cities, and also where, of course, a lot of the cultural life in Sweden is actually going on. But it's vivid in the whole country, but to find partners, it's a strong cultural life in the 3 largest cities. We speak Swedish, as you know, and we haven't got the euro, so when you make projects together, maybe it can be important to know that we have the Swedish crown as currency. I thought I would speak very, very briefly about Swedish cultural policy, just to understand a little bit of the frame. If you work with Swedish partners, since many of them receive public funding, they also have to work after the Swedish cultural policy goals. So the objectives of the Swedish cultural policy is for culture to be a dynamic, challenging and independent force based on freedom of expression. And it says that everyone should have the opportunity to participate in cultural life, and that creativity, diversity, artistic quality are to be integral parts of society's development. So this is actually what a lot of Swedish cultural operators are working on, in a way. But what is important, I think, when we speak about international cooperation is maybe for you to know that there is a very strong aim in the Swedish cultural policy for international cooperation and exchanges. So that means there are also a lot of different funding possibilities to work internationally, of course also together with you Lithuanian partners. So in the Swedish cultural policy we have this goal that says that it should promote international and intercultural exchange and cooperation. So this is a very strong government-driven aim for the culture sector, which means there are also funding possibilities for international cooperation. We can skip the other policy goals right now, I think. I thought maybe it could be interesting for you to know a little bit about the funding structure in Sweden. So you know, if you're working with a Swedish partner, what are their what are their possibilities to funding and yours as well? What we can see in Sweden is that the main it's a very broad sector. We have everything from very large institutions to very small civil society players, so it's a broad and diversified sector. But common is that many of them are dependent on public funding. So we have a quite strong system of public funding in Sweden. It's on the national level, the state level, on the regional level as well as the local level, so the city councils as well. So different funding opportunities, but there is a quite low percentage of private investments and sponsorship. It's mainly like the large national institutions like the Museum of Modern Art or the National Theatre and so on that could actually access private funding. Maybe it's interesting for you to know also that the Swedish government, they are supporting culture very strongly. We know that in Europe this looks very different these days. There has been no cuts in the funding for culture in Sweden. Actually, this current government, they rose the budget for culture this year, 2018, with almost 750 million Swedish crowns, which means that the sector is quite well funded and structured, which means that if you work with Swedish partners, they have quite a stable ground to stand on when you want to cooperate with them. I would just like to highlight there are different public funding agencies. So, as I said, I work at the Swedish Arts Council. It's at like the Norwegian Arts Council, the structure is quite the same. We are a public authority under the Ministry of Culture. So we are not at the ministry, but we are implementing the cultural policy that the government and the parliament has decided on. And the aim is to promote development, of course, in the culture sector, based then on the cultural policy objectives that I showed you a bit earlier. And also, of course, different types of activity to support and promote the development of the sector. So the Arts Council is the main funder. In Norway, it's quite a lot of money going directly from the ministry as well. In Sweden, the main funding part is directly from the Arts Council, so that's quite a difference. At the Arts Council, we fund organizations in all the different art forms. As you can see here, it's everything from performing arts, visual arts, literature, and so on. And we have these reference groups, meaning that there are experts from the field that are reading your applications and judging them and deciding about the grants. So, this is maybe most important for you when it comes to international cooperation and what are the different support systems that are available. We have, it's in many European countries, we have the same basic structure that mainly it's Swedish organizations that apply for funding, for example, from the Arts Council, to do international cooperation with other organizations. So they can apply for funding in their yearly working grants to do international cooperation. They can apply to do projects together with, for example, you here. They can apply to do co-productions, touring, etc. So this is also important for you, I think, that these are the conditions for the Swedish players, which helps to cooperate together. We have a special grant for cultural exports as well, and we have a special program for internationalization in the area of performing arts, meaning going to international fairs like APAP, seminars in Canada, and so on. I'm not sure there are any book publishers here, but we have a specific program called Swedish Literature Exchange. This is also at the Art Council that is administering this specific program. So if you are a publisher based here in Lithuania, for example, you can apply for translation grants to translate Swedish literature into Lithuanian. If you're, for example, a literature festival here in Lithuania, you can apply for inviting Swedish writers and translators to participate in literary events. And you can apply for, if you want to, Göteborg Book Fair is the largest book fair in Sweden. And if you're an agent or a publisher or a translator and you would like to know more about Swedish literature, you can actually apply for traveling grants to coming to the Göteborg Book Fair on the West Coast in September each year. And all these informations you can find on the website. So you will have the presentations, of course, you can have a look there and speak with my colleagues at the Art Council that are responsible for the Swedish Literature Exchange program. Another important player that I would like to mention, it's also a state agency. What I mentioned before, it's the Swedish Arts Council grants. And now this is the Swedish Arts Grants Committee. And the difference with the Art Council is that the Arts Grants Committee give funding for individual artists. So now we are not in organizations, but exchanges between individual artists. So this is interesting if you are an artist yourself, in visual art, performing art, for example. It can be good to know that they actually support international cultural exchanges and project grants as well. So, for example, if a Swedish artist would like to do an artistic project together with a Lithuanian artist, they can apply for funding for this from the Arts Grants Committee to do also for the artistic work that you do together, but also for the traveling costs. So this is more on a one-to-one cooperation level. They also have a music program and an international dance program that could be very interesting if you're active in those sectors as well. One other program I would like to mention is the IASPIS. Maybe some of you know it. It's run by the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, and it's a specific program for it's called the International Program for Visual and Applied Arts. So IASPIS is only focused on international exchange in the visual arts. So as you see here, it's supporting international cooperation for artists in visual art, design, architecture and crafts. So this is a very interesting program if you're an individual artist that, for example, would like to come to Sweden for a residency or this kind of stuff. There are also different programs to establish contacts, for example, between curators and critics. So if you're an art critic here in Lithuania and you want to know more about the art scene in Sweden, you can apply for specific guest visiting programs. So all this is to strengthen the international cooperation between person to person, sort of say, if you're an artist or a critic or a curator, for example. I told you a little bit about this, and just checking my time. So residencies, we have a lot of different types of residencies. I won't mention all of them, but I suggest that you contact IASPIS at the Konstnärsnämnden, the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, to have more information about all the different residency opportunities and the calls. And this is important. Swedish artists, they can also invite international artists to come to Sweden. So if you know some Swedish artist and you want to do a project in Sweden together, they can apply for that as well. And the forms, as I've written here, it can vary. It can be like joint artistic projects, it can be workshops, and the grants in general, it's to cover the cost of travels for the international guests. So the Swedish Arts Council and the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, that's the two main agencies that are important to remember. You will have this, but I will just mention there are other state-funded agencies that support international cooperation. We have the Performing Arts Agency, where Swedish cultural operators can apply for funding for cooperation projects in the music sector. So if you work in the music sector, it's the same here. It's a Swedish organization that apply. But this means if they do a project with a music organization here in Lithuania, the Swedish organization are able to co-fund very strongly your common project. So that's Performing Arts Agency, and then we heard about Swedish Institute in France, for example. We have some other programs in Sweden at the Swedish Institute as well. For example, a program called Creative Force, which could be interesting for you as well. Okay, let me see. I'm speeding up very quickly. There are a lot of different umbrella organizations that could be interesting to contact if you want specific organizations that you're interested to cooperate with. You will have this, the names of the main organizations. So one suggestion is to contact these organizations. They know all the organizations in each sector. So this is Performing Arts. We have for music, you see the organizations here. visual arts, and also the last one is the Swedish Publishers Association as well. So very briefly to finish, the Swedish art sector is a very broad and diversified sector. Many of the operators are very keen on working internationally, and I think there is a very interesting possibility to exchange between Sweden and Lithuania. You also know we have the Nordic grants. The Nordic grants can be a very good starting point for then developing, for example, a European project, or even co-funding a European project as well. So that I think is important to have in mind as well. Maybe it can be a good idea to start with the Nordic funded projects between, for example, Sweden and Lithuania, and then you can go forward to do a European project. As I said, we have quite a solid infrastructure for culture in Sweden, and very many organizations, like umbrella organizations, which makes it quite easy if you want to approach a specific sector. And I would say there is a very, very large interest for many Swedish cultural organizations to cooperate internationally. So I see very big opportunities to really strengthen the cooperation between Lithuania and Sweden, which is already quite strong. I mentioned just very quickly some examples. We heard about Transeuropal here this morning, which is a very interesting network for independent cultural centers all over Europe. Transeuropal is based in Sweden, in Lund, and they are a very interesting partner for projects and for being part also of this, as Magdalena mentioned, very important network. I won't mention the other ones. We heard here this morning, Mateja was speaking also about Versopolis, the poetry platform, where we have a Swedish and a Lithuanian partner as well, for example. Okay, I will finish. So my suggestion is that if you have, I didn't give any examples of Swedish organizations. I think maybe the best is if you contact me with your suggestions and aims and ideas, and then we can discuss, and I can give you more examples of organizations in Sweden that might be interesting for you to cooperate with. So, thank you.